Today's podcast is sponsored by Corey. Or is it Kauri? KauriWine.com, like the native wood Kauri. That's KauriWine.com. Just choose Australia or New Zealand and you're on your way. Kauri specializes in organic yeast and nutrients, and they're also there for you if you need equipment for building a new winery or upgrading your existing gear. So they've got tanks, steamers, mocks, barrel haul, humidification, all kinds of fancy toys. Have you seen their Spiegel tanks they import from Germany? They're probably one of the coolest tanks I've ever worked with. And I think that's how you pronounce it, Spiegel. It's been a while since I did my German studies. But anyway, they're about the best tanks I've ever worked with. Easy to rack off. They seal really awesome. Great valves. Really strong and lightweight to move around the winery if you need to. They're great. So just go to KauriWine.com and again, pick either New Zealand or Australia. Reach out to them and for all your winemaking, brewing, and even some food additive needs. We're also sponsored by Decibel Wines. The Testify is out and it is going. We've got it on 2 degustation menus at some of New Zealand's top restaurants, including Pacifica and Hawke's Bay and Siddart up in Auckland. There's a few other people hopping on board since I was last spoke to you guys. So I think, I said 226 packs, already down to 186 packs available. It's a bit less than last week, right? So hop on it now. Difference for you guys, if you use the promo code DBPodcast, you get 10% off your first order. It's my purest expression of Giblet Gravel's Malbec, hand on heart, best one I think I've ever produced, and I'm loving that we held it back in bottle for an extra 15 months before releasing it. Just featured at Texom in Dallas at Giblet Gravel's lunch we sponsored there, so I'm hearing good things. So go to decibelwines.com to order one of the beautiful 6-packs, and we're doing with free shipping. Again, you'll get 10% off your first order. And we're now available to ship throughout New Zealand, Australia, the US, the EU. That's all over the EU. Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, and of course the United Kingdom. Brexiters, no fear, I can still ship you wine. Just visit decibelwines.com, click Shop Decibel Wines, and then choose your flag. Very easy. Here we go, Willie D. What's up? I've just fitted my little studio with some soundproofing. I just want to let you know that I am working on it, guys. I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to make it sound better, so please hang in there. We've got some great guests booked in for the coming weeks, and I'm really trying to make it sound good too. I hope, and I'm working on my all my speech crutches, like the ums and and you know what I means and all that kind of stuff. So it is a work in progress, and I appreciate you guys listening. We are looking at the numbers, and there are people out there listening, and we're gaining some traction. I think a lot of it has to do with all these interesting guests we're booking in. And though I am talking about sound, there I go again with my verbal crutches. The last 3 podcasts I did in Sydney were all on location, all traveling. My gear is pretty mobile, so bear with us with the sound. One of them was in a restaurant. That said, the first one up is with Burzynska, and she was really good up close on the microphone. Listening back to the episode, I think she sounds a lot clearer than me, which is not a surprise. So today's episode's the first of 3 podcasts I recorded last week in Sydney in 3 consecutive days. So I'm going to release them over the next 3 weeks. First up is the very fascinating Jo Burzynska. Jo, I think I'm saying her name right. At least I'm trying to say it the way that I heard you say it. Jo is a multisensory artist whose parallel backgrounds in sound and art and professional wine writing have increasingly converged in the production of art at the intersection of the senses. This regularly combines audition and the chemical senses, taste and olfaction. The interaction between its creative application is also a topic of her current interdisciplinary doctoral research at UNSW, University of New South Wales, Art and Design. So what's all that mean? I just read that off her website. What's all that mean? Well, first it means she's a lot smarter than me. Probably smarter than most of us out there listening, or most of you guys out there listening. So, but she's in a unique position, as we discuss a lot during the podcast, of being a wine writer, very knowledgeable about wine regions, viticulture. She's worked all over the world, as well as having a fairly unique background in music. So not like my background, where I grew up playing a little guitar and a little band when I was a kid and messing around with classes here and there as I grew up, and then sleeping on some floors while touring with a rock band. No, this is not Joe's experience. Joe is a classically trained musician, a classically trained singer, plays a bit of violin and piano. And what comes with that is a great understanding of not only music, but, great musicians listen to each other. And so Joe has a keen sense of both taste and smell from that wine background and of hearing and of those senses. So combine that together in her case, and you get some of the most fascinating scientific research happening today. I sort of get a bit woo-woo about all this stuff, and I admit it. It's very close to my heart. I think about the book, The Pearl from John Steinbeck, one of our great American authors who I read as a kid a lot. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's a pretty short book, but he discusses music in a way that it sort of passes through our DNA, down through generations. And I'm not sure if that really relates to what Joe's PhD work is, probably not, but anyway, it's kind of how I relate to things. And I think the idea with Joe is her, it's the music part is one facet, and trying to understand about the crossover between the senses. So we discuss that a lot, even though she's got a really wide, varied background. That crossover of the senses is the big thing, and she explains it a lot better than I do. So let's get into it with Joe Burzynska. Yeah, I think if you just speak generally in the direction of the microphone, we'll be in good shape. Great. I have notes, which I've never done for a podcast before, because normally I just get into it and start, just talking, which we will do as well. But I have some specific questions, because what you're doing and what you're presenting is pretty fascinating. It's something that I'll probably explain more, but it's pretty dear to my heart as far as the passion and my history, but something probably more recently that I've trying to become more attuned to. But what are you doing your PhD in right now?
My PhD is looking at the interaction between sound and the chemical senses. So,
is anybody else doing that PhD?
There's psychologists who are doing some kind of research in that area. I'm doing it from an artistic point of view, okay. And there's no one doing the research that involves taste and olfaction and sound, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. I'd be very happy if there was someone else in my artistic field, but I'm also doing work with psychologists and cognitive scientists, cognitive neuroscientists as well, to kind of apply and kind of draw on some of the research that's been going on in that area, which has been really, really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there these days. So obviously I know you from the wine industry, but and I discovered your project. I think the first thing I heard about was that you had a wine bar or something.
We had the Oracle wine bar. It was a Sonic Arts Gallery and wine and sound bar. Yeah. Which I think was the world's first, actually, to actually have
I never heard of it.
a dedicated permanent wine bar where the sounds in the space matched the wine list.
Pretty interesting. So that, and then I approached you at Pinot 17 after your presentation, which was pretty cool, which I'll get into in a second because I have some questions about that. But sort of rewinding back a bit, you're Kiwi, Australian?
I am I'm a bit of a mixture.
Yeah.
I was born
I'm trying to place the accent, that's why.
Born in the UK.
Okay.
I moved to New Zealand in 2004, and I'm a New Zealand citizen.
Okay.
Currently in Australia to do this PhD.
I swore I heard an Australian word in there. I can't remember what it was, but I thought, yeah, maybe. How long have you been in Sydney?
Well, I'm married to an Australian, but I identify as a Kiwi, so
sure.
that's where my heart is.
Yes, good. And so you got here in 2004 and studied here, or I'm sorry, in New Zealand you studied?
I did all kind of my study in the UK before coming to New Zealand. In New Zealand, I just focused on the wine writing and wine judging. And parallel to this, I was continuing to do my sonic art as well.
But you were doing wine writing in the UK?
Yeah. I've kind of been doing it for, probably...
Must have started quite young then.
Yeah, that was basically, after I finished, I've got my degree in Masters was in English, and I went into the wine trade kind of first off when I finished. It was just actually I'd got into wine. I'd always been into tasting things and was a keen kind of cook.
Yeah.
And it was just while I tried to work out what I was going to do in life, I thought, I like wine.
Yep.
So I basically joined a kind of quality wine chain and ended up running a wine shop in central London for a couple of years and did all my Wine and Spirit Education Trust qualifications there.
Yeah.
And then kind of realised that I actually really like writing, and kind of did a course in journalism and started writing about wine from the get-go, really. I did a brief spell of financial journalism, but that wasn't as exciting.
Yeah. I think it's pretty funny that, well, it's probably not that funny to the people that it happens to, but there are people that, you know, they really like wine and they like to describe wine, but they forget, like, you need to be a good writer. And that's where the best wine writers that I enjoy reading and, you know, the ones obviously that have the most success are good writers, just are good journalists at the heart, you know, and they happen to have a passion for wine as well. So I feel like the good ones, they could write about anything really, you know.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I didn't know you had a journalism background as well. So unlike, you know, this thing with the podcast and everything, I also find the people that have been most successful tend to be people who have done some sort of broadcasting or journalism where I don't. I'm just a winemaker. But well, that's really interesting. And then, but obviously, very creative, artistic side as well.
Yeah. So in parallel to the wine, from kind of an early age, I was kind of classically trained in music when I was growing up. And then when I moved to London to do my
which instrument or instruments?
Voice and violin with a bit of piano. But I think the voice was my preferred thing. I kind of struggled on with the violin for many years, kind of out of sheer bloody-mindedness rather than any talent, I think. But then I got into kind of more experimental and alternative music. I bought a bass guitar when I was 14. And when I moved to London, I focused more. It became increasingly experimental music that I was doing. Started out doing DJing actually, but kind of.
So all the pieces that I heard is stuff you mixed? Or,
yeah. So I create all my own soundscapes in my own
that's
work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different kind of talent too. So you have to go out and collect sound, basically.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my sound practice is actually based on environmental recordings. So going around, kind of recording things like those birds that were in the soundscape. Those are New Zealand birds.
Yeah, I would assume, but there's a lot of loud and funny birds in Sydney as well. But
yeah, they're a lot more raucous actually. So the New Zealand birds were more attuned to what I wanted to do in my soundscape. So yeah, they were recorded on the Banks Peninsula. So, I mean, everywhere I go, I tend to record. So I've got this big bank of recordings. And obviously the wine project Anesthesia that I did back in 2012, that was a project that was completely created from recordings of the winemaking process.
That I remember reading about and seeing online and everything. Reading about that project. And I think I saw a photo of you in the vineyard.
Yeah, recording a canopy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was kind of recording the soil to the vines, into the winery, wine fermenting.
When you're out, outside of a tractor going by or something, are you trying to tune into a certain, without sounding too trippy, but tune into a frequency to, maybe the soil, or there's some sort of, or is it wind, or what are you trying to capture there?
Well, I guess like with that particular project, it was like firstly making lots and lots of recordings of the winemaking process. But I was very keen to start with the soil and in the vineyards, because obviously that's a very important part. So I did a lot of recordings, and I didn't know until I got them back into the studio what exactly I would use. But part of that project as well was also, as well as making recordings, I was tasting the local wines as well. So kind of bearing in mind the flavour profiles of those wines, which was Campania. I was kind of based near Tufo, so Greco de Tufo country, and Torazi,
and hang out and do a project.
Yeah, so it's kind of collecting sound samples and tasting wine samples.
How did you discover to go to there, or how did you end up doing it there?
I was actually offered a residency by an Italian curator called Leandro Pisano, who organises rural residencies for artists, and he'd heard about my work with wine and sound, which hadn't been as integrated. I was largely being a sound artist who was also a wine writer, but I'd started to kind of get interested in combining the two, especially after the first wave, kind of the first of the new wave of research in psychology came out, which actually showed it wasn't just me that were making.
No, you were.
Yeah, because for a long time I just thought, well, I'm highly engaged with sound and I'm highly engaged with wine, so I think there's some things going on for me, but I assumed it was just me. So I started exploring that, and the curator of these residency programs, he got in contact with me, and I thought, well, brilliant, that would be a great place to kind of take this a step further and really kind of explore, not just kind of, I'd been doing sound and wine matching with other people's music, and had done one wine piece myself.
I think that was in the mix. Did you do a piece that was in the Pinot 17?
I think that was a later piece that I did. Yeah. But yeah, the 2012 project in Italy was the first one that really brought everything together, and kind of my sound, my own kind of creative sound practice becoming part of that as well. So it was brilliant. I just got offered the opportunity to go to Italy and focus on this project, and try loads of wonderful wines, be in a beautiful place, kind of listen, record some really interesting sounds, and put it all together to present at a festival, which was it was a wine and music festival. Kind of experimental and sound artists were kind of performing and presenting their works. So the Anesthesia work was first premiered in the little kind of wine village of Tufo in the village square, with the speakers around it, and people being given wines at the right time that went with the different sections of the piece that I'd made. So it was great. It felt right, and it worked. So it was like, that was kind of a game-changing project.
Epiphany-ish.
Yeah.
And then onwards from there. And then then you came back to Christchurch at that point?
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
That's
I've been down there a couple times recently. City's on the rise again. Tons of restaurants, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
It's like everywhere you look, there's a crane or a restaurant. You were just saying, so the project was called Anesthesia?
Anesthesia.
So, as opposed to synesthesia?
Yeah.
So
with enos, as in the play for the Greek word for wine, and kind of playing with the word synesthesia, obviously the condition in where the senses become kind of cross-wired. Obviously, synesthesia is something, it's a fairly rare condition. But what I'm really interested in, what it refers to, and kind of the main thrust of my own research is looking at the sensory interactions that happen with kind of the general wider public.
Yeah, I don't. You would know. There's going to be a lot you're going to know more about this than me, but I'm going to have some assumptions. And but as far as synesthesia goes, could it be something like autism or something where certain people are on the spectrum, and then there's certain people that are, way into it? I know a guy who he saw people as numbers, and he never got it wrong. Like I was a 4, and I was always a 4, and he's a 7, she's a 2.
Yeah,
and whereas maybe I have it in a lighter way, I have synesthesia light or something,
Yeah, it's interesting. The jury's still out. It's still kind of a hot debate. For example, the cognitive neuroscientist that I've been working with on this Osmic Resonance project, she's an expert in synesthesia and sensory integration. She believes that it is a spectrum, and that you get synesthetes at one end, and then you kind of get lots of different levels in between. But these sensory interactions are happening not only with synesthetes where they're very, very strong. Sometimes they can be very, very specific as well.
That number one was pretty.
Yeah.
I don't know where that falls in, but I think I've heard of that from other people too. But you grow up in a bar and you meet some interesting people over the years.
Yeah. But there's also on the other kind of perspective, there's people like Charles Spence, who is he's a experimental psychologist who I'm working with at Oxford University, and he considers that that synesthesia is a separate phenomenon to these cross-modal correspondences, which are the sensory correspondences that are experienced by the wider public. So the jury is still out, but what I'm working with is definitely the cross-modal correspondences, the things that we all share. And my PhD research, is mapping out more of these correspondences that are widely shared. It could be some things are quite culturally specific when it comes to taste, which is quite a kind of culturally embedded.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems that plays a part as well. And so you'll get different correspondences in different cultures.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good place to ask where I don't know if the neuroscientist has something to say about the evolutionary, there must be a reason why so many of us cross these things up, in that, I don't know, was it I'm on the hunt in the forest and I smell something and that reminded me of something, or I hear something that reminds me of a memory, and I get out of there. There's an elephant coming to get me, or a tiger, or whatever.
It does actually seem that quite a lot of these correspondences are to make us kind of quicker and better at kind of achieving tasks. But it's quite interesting. There isn't anything yet which is kind of firmly in place to suggest why we might have correspondences between sounds and tastes and sounds and olfaction, and I haven't found that it will make us do a task more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, if it has to relate to something else.
But, it's early days in the research, and so far an interesting study has been done on mice, obviously kind of an animal, but it kind of shows that the olfactory tubercle, there's a connection with the auditory system, and so when a mouse hears a sound, the olfactory system is stimulated. So it could be I don't know, it might be something to do with hunting. Maybe a sound triggers kind of an olfactory kind of heightened response. This isn't my area of speciality, but this is interesting background. Or it could be the sound that food makes when you, when you're actually an animal or a human is actually getting into like peeling something or eating something. Certainly it's quite interesting. In my own work, I did a piece called Carbonic Oscillation, where I created a effervescing chamber, and that was using the sounds of fermentation, so kind of very kind of fizzing, effervescing soundtrack. I had a visual stimulus, was a light projection, which was very much like kind of popping bubbles, kind of quite crackly kind of visuals. And it was designed that participants went in with a glass of sparkling wine. It was all about kind of dissolving the boundaries between kind of the participant and the experience.
Yeah, sure.
And it was interesting. At one point, somebody went in with a glass of sparkling wine it was flat. They weren't meant to get that wine, so there wasn't very much effervescence in it at all, left in the wine at all.
Yeah.
And they didn't notice until they came out of the installation. And it was like, oh, this is flat. But within the space, it had actually made them the sounds.
Jumpy.
It had carbonated their wine, and it was like, oh, that's really interesting. So kind of there's that had created kind of a sensory kind of illusion, I guess, kind of based on kind of what they were hearing, which was interesting.
Yeah. So with that, and I don't know how much data you're collecting at an exhibit or a project like that, and what I just did here at your exhibit here in Sydney, and what I think at the Pinot 17 conference, you had a giant room full of wine professionals, and I don't know how much data there was, or it was probably just more a presentation, I'm guessing, and just to get us thinking, and I thought it was a really nice break from all the other stuff we were doing, but though the tastings were really good and everything. One of the questions I had, and I said this before we started recording, I wrote some things down, and I don't normally do this, so pardon me if it's a bit clunky me reading this, but I sort of wrote a complex system as it relates to consciousness, and if we, how skewed would the data be for somebody like me who's a wine professional and has a trained palate, and as opposed to a punter who just walks in and I guess this speaks to what kind of projects and how you collect data, in the sense that, okay, we taste 4 things and maybe we listen to 4 different kinds of music. I might adjust to that a lot quicker, and my sort of synapses are quicker because I just do it professionally, or you do it professionally, as opposed to the data you might get off somebody who is just sort of surprised by every little thing that happens,
Yeah, it's really interesting because I remember the first time I ever presented a wine and sound tasting, and it was at a professional wine kind of exhibition in Auckland to wine professionals. And I was really, really nervous. I thought, because I was quite surprised that it happened, that the change, I perceived quite a lot of changes in wine with different sounds for myself. Yeah. I kind of thought that they were interacting. But then I thought, actually, that's really shifting my perspective on things. And I like to think that my judgment is quite, it can't just be changed by my environmental factors. So I felt a bit nervous about that. But then it was like, okay, well, if this works for me, and I'm obviously a highly engaged wine professional, I'll try it out on this room of wine professionals. And they were all kind of really, I think quite a lot of people were very skeptical, but probably similar to what happened at the Pinot Noir conference. People were really quite surprised at how much their perception of what they were tasting changed. So it's like, firstly, being able to change a wine professional's perspective on something, that was like the first challenge, and it works. And there has been data gathered actually in relation to wine and sound, using professionals and non-professionals by Charles Spence at Oxford University and Janice Wang, who have both kind of been doing some interesting research, and Janice particularly with wine as well. She's probably the person that's kind of closest to doing what I'm doing. But they found that there wasn't very much difference between the professional and the kind of non-professional.
The flip side of that is I've done, one of the first things I did when I moved to New Zealand was a tasting wheel of aromas, or not a wheel, but it's like set aromas like passion fruit and capsicum, blah, blah, blah. And the kids just blew away the adults in this. And there was like people who thought they knew a lot about wine at this little event in Havelock North. And so there's something to be said too about a fresh palate or innocent palate as well. But it's surprising, I don't know, probably the wine writers and the buyers might be a little more stubborn with changing but I would think from a winemaking standpoint of view, we're always looking for advantages. And I know from working with most of the winemakers I've worked with, the good ones at least, we taste something before we make a decision over the course of weeks, because are we sure, particularly with Pinot Noir, it's very susceptible to, we rack it out of a barrel into a tank, and I taste it, I go, something's wrong there, or is it me? And then you come back to it, and just by paying attention to the biodynamic calendar, I've noticed that, maybe it was a fruit day, and that was tasting that day. So, of course, other influences, music, the day, your emotions, what's going on, what you ate, there's millions of other things that have to. So I would hope the winemakers out there at least would be very open to this idea, and we certainly blare enough music in the winery, all of us, to be inspired to try to make good decisions.
Yeah.
So maybe it's your fellow wine writers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we kind of, we obviously, everybody is different, and there's lots of different factors. But in general, what I've found is, like, if you're really actively engaged with, say, wine, we've got our own language of wine that we use, and we think very much about. We've got a lot of experience. So we can kind of dissect a wine, we can smell a wine, and we can taste a wine, we can think about what that is, maybe how that was created, kind of, the character of a grape variety. Whereas kind of the general member of the general public, that might say smells like red wine. They haven't got the vocabulary, because it's not a vocabulary that we have in our language. We've had to kind of, people that are really kind of focused on taste have had to kind of, say in wine, have had to really kind of develop our own language to talk with.
So many parallels to music, though, as well.
Yeah.
It's knowing what is, what is good, what is one of the experiences I had in there that I didn't think about was, I just had a sound guy tell me when I was, pretty young in the music industry that, something I always knew, but I never put a terminology to, which is, treble and high end is directional, and bass and low end is omnidirectional, which is if you stand backstage at a concert, all you hear is the kick drum and the bass player. And then if you stand, 100 meters back from the stage, all you hear is the treble, because the bass sort of, it sort of dies out omnidirectional, whereas, so just something like that in music, I wouldn't have been able to put terminology to that and understand it, and you just kind of walk in as a professional, well, that's the way that is, and we need to put subwoofers, 50 meters down, so that and delay the sound or whatever, and so, but you do make these connections in your head that keeps. But yeah, that sort of goes back to my question: is if there is a difference between the rookie and the professional.
I think when it comes to using our senses, we're using them in a pretty similar way. What is the main difference is that we've got the words to describe it, what's happening to us, and most people don't. And it's quite interesting, currently doing this work with sense as well as sound. People are notoriously bad at identifying smells. Even if I would say even a winemaker, if they're not familiar, if they're not kind of part of the kind of really direct work that someone's doing, probably even a winemaker might kind of find it difficult to kind of put their finger on some kind of aromas which might be kind of around and about, but it's not a thing humans do very well. So it's and that's everybody. But if you're kind of dealing in a certain area with a certain kind of subset of smells, then you'll be pretty good with those.
Yeah. Yeah, we know how, when we smell Brettanomyces.
Yep.
That one we know, and cork taint.
Yeah.
And what does it have to relate to as far as memory? Does your any work have to do with that? Everybody talks about it, and I experience it all the time. I walk in and I smell something, and I go, oh, I'm back in my grandmother's kitchen right now. That's the one memory, or that's an example of a memory that I think a lot of people say is they smell something from their childhood, and I relate it to. I always joke around, it's time travel. It's you're immediately back there.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, I've just been writing up something on my computer this afternoon about the research that I'm doing with this Osmic Resonance project, which was very much a part of it, was looking at memories and emotions. Because within kind of looking at work and research that has looked at sound and olfaction, or audition and olfaction and interactions between, a lot of the research has looked at kind of perceptual correspondences. There is an increasing amount of work which shows that emotion may be mediating these correspondences, but nothing had really drilled down to find out what was behind the emotion. And for me, I just thought, well, as part of the research I'm doing here, looking at the emotion and the fact that kind of our olfactory system is directly kind of connected to the amygdala, which is responsible for memory and emotion. This was a really important thing. And if I was going to be creating works which use sound and aromas, I needed to know kind of what do we share and what could be just really, really personal. And do people's personal memories, are those affecting the ways that they're going to kind of interact when it comes to sound as well? So as I ran this experiment, which I was helped with the experimental design by the cognitive neuroscientist Anina Rich, who's a specialist in synesthesia and sensory interaction.
I wrote her name down.
Yeah, she's at Macquarie University. She's really good. And the first time I ever met her, she was talking at an art event. So she's got a really good way of kind of talking to a wide group of people, and helped me design this experiment, which was seeking to identify more correspondences, because not a huge amount have been mapped between sounds and aromas. Not very complex sounds anyway. There's been an experiment which has matched pitch and aromas, which was an attempt to try and find some classification system for aromas, because as you know there's not a colour wheel for smell. I mean, people try kind of for wine making an aroma wheel, but it's kind of not really an exact science.
No, it's a bit just kind of examples of what you might smell in a wine or something.
Yeah, rather than actually the kind of way that they're ordered is not kind of, it doesn't feel that natural. So people are still trying to...
It's a tall task, I would say,
yeah.
Because even just in the world of wine, that's, forgetting food and everything else and, industrial smell, anything that I think about. There are certain things in Italian wines, particularly Italian white wines, that I've never smelled in really any other wines from other parts of the world, and I can't really put my finger on what. And I've thought about it a lot and tasted ones. It's kind of an anise. It's kind of a tea leaf thing. I don't know if it's a stressed vine thing or.
Yeah.
But I know it when I get it, and it brings me back to. It's also a sense memory thing. I go, I like that. It makes me feel nice. Makes me, remind me of my family and everything.
Yeah, I totally have that as well. I've got these terms that I write down in some tasting notes, which are very personal to me, which I know I could never kind of write something for the Herald and kind of write that in a description. But it's a word for a certain kind of aroma or a taste that really I haven't been able to kind of cross-reference it with any kind of established nomenclature. It's I just have to try and kind of evoke it as much as I can through words, but it's like the actual associations are quite kind of personal, and the terminology is totally personal, so no one's going to get that. So it is really, really important. That's why kind of in this research I was really keen. I asked people to kind of match sounds and aromas, but I also asked them to note down if an aroma or a sound also evoked a personal response. For the sounds, there wasn't so much writing from the participants as I had thought. I kind of asked them about the sounds just to kind of keep kind of the balance. But with the aromas, so many people, lots of all the aromas that were recognised, there was some associations of certain levels there, and some, and well, I say the majority of them went back to childhood. They're kind of old, kind of quite ingrained associations. It's not like, oh, this smell reminds me of when I walked past this like last week.
Yeah.
There was lots of kind of things like cooking with kind of a mother, or lots of kind of very, very strong memories that were evoked by the smells. So, it makes it a very complex area to deal with, because you've got all of these people's like personal memories and emotions that you're working with. So it was kind of the kind of findings that I got from my experiment. Kind of it showed, I think, that the emotional way that this mediation of the senses is emotional, as well as kind of there's different other factors which kind of cause cross-modal correspondences. But within the emotions, when it comes to smell, and kind of, I'm sure with taste as well, I haven't looked into that into so much kind of depth. But the emotions and memories and associations are very much part of that picture. Which,
what about about the mapping? I've in my courses I've studied like mapping of the mouth and where you taste certain things, and the fact that what salt actually does on a chemical level and brings up that free hydrogen ion, I think it is, or something. I'm trying to remember the smell, the nose, the olfactory. I don't remember how much we studied that, or I've studied that, as far as what reactions are going on, and is it a much wider range, I would think, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess kind of research into olfaction, there's just not as much as with a lot of other senses. It's still kind of...
It's so more vague, and like it's a bit more mysterious.
I mean, people kind of... I've been spending years like trying to work out how it actually works.
Yeah,
so I mean, the kind of people have got a pretty good idea about vision, but when it comes to olfaction, there's still a lot of uncharted territory that people are working out, which I think is probably why it's not kind of communicated about as much. It's still kind of a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I find it really interesting as well. And of course, these links with kind of emotion, and the fact they can do very strong and powerful things with the sense of smell.
Have you read Perfume by Patrick Süskind?
I have, yep.
Okay, that would have to be number one on your reading list, or,
Yeah.
For fiction at least. God, I hope it's fiction. For any winemakers out there who haven't read that one, that's a must-do.
Yeah.
Which I stumbled on that book. Somebody randomly, it was in a reading list at a school I went to in Belgium, and they I was like, oh, that one looks good, and I just read it, and halfway through, I was like so wrapped up in this book, it was crazy. And this is way before any wine or anything was in my life, really, in a major way. But it had a long impact, as far as I should go back and read it again, because I definitely remember the descriptions of that. And that was the first time I'd ever seen somebody write out something about smell in such a way that was just emotional and non-emotional. The guy was a bit of a psychopath, obviously. But yeah, that. It's this sort of vagueness and mystery that's around it, because I think also with taste in your mouth, you're dealing with hot and cold and salty and sweet, and there's like parameters that you sort of think about, whereas when you smell something, you're like, well, that's just that, or it's kind of like that, and it's just the whole thing's a lot more vague. So you got your work cut out for you, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think, if you're working with olfaction, if you're kind of within my kind of creative practice, my artwork, I'm wanting to make experiences where the senses are integrated and it kind of works. Obviously, everybody brings something different, even if you're just kind of looking at something. If you just,
I think I just got a whiff from the room there.
It's
one of your florals.
Quite fragrant, yeah.
Yes.
I've been kind of, diffusing quite a lot of kind of citrus kind of into the mix.
Yes.
But, what was I saying?
Just about your work cut out for you.
Yeah. If you're actually wanting to create something that's going to work for quite a few people, kind of getting your head around associations. I mean, the easiest thing is positive versus negative associations. And in my experiment, lemon was the most liked smell. It was the most familiar smell.
Very familiar.
And everyone had a positive association. Maybe not so many of the kind of deeply kind of emotional ones, But there was kind of
I know that. Aha.
yeah, and ideas of freshness and cleanness. I guess lemons in a lot of clean products as well.
I was
So
thinking of
there's
Pine Sol and floor cleaners.
yeah,
and,
in a kind of a nice way. That's not kind of if you get into the realms of disinfectant, that starts getting a bit negative, kind of cleaning up some kind of mess. But it was interesting that was the most kind of positively responded to. So I've kind of put kind of lemon into this particular installation, and that it was most matched with the bird song that I played.
I think I may have written something.
Yeah,
like that,
which was quite surprising to me because I hadn't. It's not until you sit down and actually work these things through that you kind of find out where kind of these correspondences lie. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I kind of tried it, and it's like, that.
It's the high end thing.
The brightness.
It's the brightness, and if I look back at a lot of the music I've kind of liked brighter digital delay and things like that, so I thought maybe that was it, but it probably has more to do with what you're saying, that it's familiar and that we like, we've all had that wine epiphany where you think you love a wine so much, and then you start learning about wine, and you enjoy it because you're recognizing things in it, and you like when you do good. People like when they enjoy things when they're good at it. So I think that might be part of it too, the emotion of, I know what that is.
Familiarity, definitely more positive responses when people know what it is. So I think it's kind of personal preference, kind of liking, familiarity, and with the lemon, there was also these strong correspondences. Both the bird song and the lemon were rated highly as being bright. Yeah. So there's some kind of perceptual realm as well. These correspondences are not simple things, so it's likely there's lots and lots of layers. But I think kind of the emotional appears to be kind of one of those, and certainly it's important, I think, with kind of olfaction. So
I wonder if it's sort of pendulum in that it can get too bright into, I'm sure it is, that annoying, and then
I mean, I've done things with wine and sound where I'm kind of talking with acidity, where there's associations between acidity and high pitches. And I really like high acid wines, so I can play something with quite a high pitch, and it's like, it's kind of, dialing up the acidity, intensifying it even further. But then you can actually push it into a painful zone, and for some people that comes a bit like less, because I've done kind of quite a lot of tastings with people, kind of testing the kind of sound acid level for people, and I realise I've got my threshold is fairly high. I can kind of do quite high frequencies and high acid wines, and that's okay. But for some people, it's like, oh no, it's making the wine taste like sour and kind of like unbearable now. So you can kind of modulate people's perspectives.
So what would the low end, is that like some of those mustier and I don't know about the cedarwood, because that was kind of bright as well.
Yeah, the cedarwood was more mid-spectrum in the end. Actually, that kind of popped up into the mid-range. Yeah, so in the kind of
but the sweetness,
sweetness, that vanilla, the vanilla-y sweetness is, I think that's quite low as
like heavier,
as well.
Sort of lush. I think of the word lush and low and slightly droney, and obviously that can go into sort of sloppy and fat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the studies that I'm doing, the one that I'm doing with Charles Spence at Oxford University, is looking at kind of frequency and various wine characters, because there's been quite a lot of research done with acidity across various things and high pitch. So that's quite robustly been kind of illustrated, but I'm quite interested in looking down in the base range. So that's the research that I'm doing at present, like what happens there. So that will be a paper, no doubt, coming out.
I just had a really random thought that with all this talk of AI, obviously more and more all the time, and how they're building robots and this and that, and I forget the name of the scientist they named the test after, where you can't decide if it's a person on the other end of they ask you have a conversation with them basically, and it's a computer or it could be a person, and there's some scientist they named it after if it passes the something test. But it's pretty high hopes for humans that I don't think a robot could do a sensory test like that. I mean, it's got to be one of our more complex systems in the body.
Yeah.
I forget about the brain and everything that's going on there, but as far as like a quick test, I don't know how many robots can smell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a basic nose that they've developed. I think it smells rotting things, and it's like kind of a chemical kind of nose.
If there's a fire.
Yeah, but I think the nose, it's like that was so people didn't have to go around checking kind of freshness, and you could have a nose which does it for you. But it's a pretty blunt instrument. I think
That's like an industrial instrument.
Yeah, that particular instrument is. Yeah, it just checks for, I think,
rotting meat or something.
So it's not really picking out kind of nuances in a fragrance, and and it's not going to be able to associate with that with anything in the wider world.
No.
So, but yeah, I think a lot of olfactory technology kind of lags behind, and in AI as well. You might be able to navigate kind of around increasingly convincing landscapes, but very often
it speaks to what you said about visual. We've kind of mapped that part out.
The smells are kind of way behind.
Yeah.
I went to quite an interesting artificial intelligence. It was virtual reality exhibition when I was in Montreal. I went to present a paper and some work at the Uncommon Senses conference. But while I was in Montreal, I went to a kind of virtual reality exhibition. And the smell side of things was so basic.
Yeah.
In one, it was just like, you're in a forest and they'd kind of put some kind of foresty floor things on the actual floor, and it didn't change. Your vision's changing and there's loads of stuff going on there. But when it comes to the smells, it's like,
pretty basic.
It was kind of like, and I for me, that really, I find that really noticeable. I guess I'm highly engaged, but it's like you've worked so hard to make a really visually convincing environment. The actual smell, your smellscape is lacking.
It's just I'll just whiff some of this over there, and they hope they get away with it because they probably don't. It's got to be a terribly hard thing to mimic.
I mean, it's a very hard thing to deliver smells, as I've kind of been realising since I've been working with them. I've like devised my own little fans that diffuse smells, but it's still within this very exhibition. I had to put an extra fan together for the citrus high notes, because in the general diffusion, they didn't seem to be just coming out. It was completely different from when I was actually smelling the scent that I'd made. When I was putting it out there, the citrus kind of was missing, and it was like, oh no, I've got to remix that one in.
I mean, it's possibly that it is about that, a smell isn't necessarily the same all the time, or if like visually there might be a certain depth, and there might be that building is there and it's that color, or at least that's how we perceive it in this world, without getting too woo-woo into what reality we're in. But with smell, it's sort of evolving constantly. It's not like, is it there? And then you kind of have to go back and smell it again. Even just in wine, but you could be at the beach and you're smelling 50 different things. It's not one thing you're smelling. It's a bit of ocean breeze, and then the sand, and then maybe there's some seaweed. It's all these different things happening around us all the time.
Yeah.
Not that visually there isn't a lot, but it's a little more mapped out, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously kind of
it's
aromas.
Invisible.
Yeah, aromas are difficult to capture. There's there's no phone for a kind of smartphone camera for aromas, and kind of difficult to replicate as well and share easily. And so certainly, and I've seen some things, people are trying to do things with computers and kind of smell canisters on computers to try and kind of give smell to the kind of experience they're having through their computer. But it's such clunky basic stuff at present, like kind of the visual realm is way ahead. As it always is. People give it more focus. We are kind of a visual society. But for me, there's so much excitement to be had in sounds and smells and tastes, and with smells and tastes being the kind of more regularly overlooked areas. So I think kind of ripe for kind of further exploration.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why we close our eyes a bit when we smell. Sometimes, we've got to shut everything else out, or maybe it's, Like when I'm trying to follow directions, I have to turn the volume down on the stereo. Similar type of stuff, but I know I hope we do close our eyes a little more, and not only meditate, but also, smell and take in the world in a different, in other ways,
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the installation that I've got here, it's very low lit. It's trying to take away visual stimulus. I've also done work with sound and taste, which has blindfolds. It's just trying to kind of remove vision because it keeps on coming in and dominating, kind of whether you like it or not.
It does. I've seen winemakers guess red and white wine wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's been like a formal study of wine students that was done in Bordeaux, and they dyed a white wine red, and people started getting red wine characters.
Yeah.
And I had a really interesting experience. I had a short spell at the Centre for the Study of the Senses in London, which is a really interesting multidisciplinary department. And the director there, Barry Smith, who is actually really into wine, he's written some interesting things about senses and wine. He kind of did this test for me where he gave me this fruit juice and he said, "What is it?" And it was a kind of red juice. It looked like tomato juice. And then I smelt it and it's like, it doesn't quite smell like tomato juice, but it was like so difficult. I could feel myself, the colour cue of that liquid was really playing havoc with being able to judge with my nose. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm a professional taster. I am really struggling because the visual cue, and I could feel this pull in my brain. I could feel this pull between the kind of the colour, which was telling me tomato or kind of maybe raspberry or something. And it was like, no. And it was a real struggle, but it was like, I got it in the end, and it was pineapple juice that had been dyed. But this kind of internal struggle that went on to get that pineapple because of the misleading visual cue just shows like how strong kind of vision is.
You'd have to train yourself otherwise to be able to do that. It's not like we're set up to do that. We're meant to work together. And again, visual it's the quickest thing for us right away.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of an interesting thing which I noted about wine on Friday. The kind of legendary orange wine producer Radicon, Sacha Radicon, was in Sydney giving a tasting of his orange wines. And he was saying one of the issues is that people associate that coloured wine with oxidation. And he said that kind of he feels that people are actually starting to notice or smell oxidation characters in the wine because they had made such a strong judgment on colour based on their previous associations. So that was something he was coming up against. It was like, there isn't oxidation. This colour is because of the skin contact. It's not oxidation. But people were actually kind of hallucinating oxidation because of those associations, which are really hard to break visually. So I thought that was kind of interesting kind of perspective when it comes to judging a wine.
Well, it's how most people are taught is look at it in the glass, and right away you're going to start making assumptions. Bright, vibrant wine you think is going to be taste and smell bright and vibrant, and I think orange wine is something that's it's the oldest thing, but it's something that is sort of at the beginning again for retraining us all, especially when they're made properly and they're made right. I have a good friend, Hayden, who makes supernatural wines.
Yeah.
He those wines, they're not faulty. They just are beautiful wines that age really long time. And who's the Italian producer? He's kind of like the godfather in Italy. But I opened one of his wines at a tasting with a bunch of winemakers who were so like some of the old guard are pretty anti-orange wine. And I maybe just caught them sort of post-harvest. Everybody was in a good mood, and it just stunned the room. They were just like, "Oh, this, where'd this wine come from?" And but we have to get past those, perception or predetermined,
Yeah, we're kind of conditioned. These things get built up through experience, and they can be very difficult to break.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I have much more on my list here. I had all these long notes about data, and but you went into Anna Rich, which I was going to ask about her. Evolution, I think that's one of the big things that I was really curious about, and I know it's early days for all this stuff, but I think evolution as it is to memory and things, I'm very curious to see where that, why smell particularly, is time travel to, for a lot of people, and why.
Yes, I think it is this. I think the kind of the most likely thing is that the olfactory system is linked to the amygdala, which is responsible.
But is it an accident that or is it?
Why that is? Yeah, I mean, smells are pretty important. I think people like us, we realise that smells are important. I mean, smells are important. I mean, even come from sniffing out a partner.
Yes.
That's kind of an important kind of part of evolution, right? At the very kind of the crux of things.
Pheromones and everything else.
Yeah. So we kind of there's some pieces in place, but there's still a lot to be put on. But the interesting thing is that there is a lot of research going on in the area kind of olfaction, and more attention being given to it overall. For example, there's a whole branch of history which is now olfactory history. So it's looking at the kind of smells of a time and a place and putting those into kind of referencing those in kind of historical ways, which I find really interesting. It's
hopefully not Paris in the Middle Ages.
Well, I met when I was at the Uncommon Senses conference. I met a olfactory historian, and he goes through loads of decades. It's like a decade, a year, and he's had to do a few pretty kind of smelly ones, unpleasantly.
If I can ask anything out of this, is to please, keep in touch about upcoming interesting things going on. I don't know if there's a place to follow your work or anything. Yeah,
I have got a website, which is joburzynska.com. Maybe you could put a link
I can put that in the notes, and I will. I always do that.
So in theory, I have got a multisensory blog as well as a wine blog going. I haven't written as much as I'd like on the multisensory blog, but actually just before you were coming in, I was just writing an update about this residency. So there is something that's going to be going up for probably by the time your listeners listen to this, there'll be some kind of new information there. And I am going to try and resolve to put a bit more up. And also links when I have work published. I've got a paper coming out where I was assessing anesthesia. So I basically kind of put my anesthesia, wine and sound work kind of through a study and got participant feedback on it just to see if it worked in the way that I hoped it would. And that's coming out in the International Journal of Food Design actually this month. So that's kind of an academic paper.
Yes.
So these things, from as things happen, I kind of will feed them out. I finished my PhD in 2020, and that's when I can probably reveal all, and things could be even more clear. At present, I've got a lot of different studies in the offing. I've got the one with Oxford. I've got one at Adelaide University with their sensory department in their wine.
Is there any crossover with industry or people reaching out to you guys?
I've done some more things actually recently with spirits producers than wine producers. I did do something back in New Zealand with Crown Range Cellars where they commissioned me to create some sound works for individual wines. So the work that I created for Pinot Noir was the one that I presented at the Pinot Noir conference. That was my piece amongst the dubstep and the Tool.
Yes.
But since I've been in Sydney, I've actually worked with Bombay Sapphire, and I did soundscapes which were matched with 4 different cocktails, which also brought in the botanical nuances. So I did.
Gin, I have a good buddy who makes gin, Chris Reed in Martinborough, and I think they're in Australia now as well. And I've sort of gotten a little more hip to the botanicals and all the different things and smells that are going on there. So it's endless, really.
Yeah. I mean, that was great fun to do that project. It was just focusing on a single botanical, which was the hero of a cocktail. and a room as well. So it was kind of a visual artist I was working with too, and to like make a soundscape which totally really kind of brought out the positive characters of the flavour, and also kind of the conceptual kind of nature as well, and kind of where it came from.
I'm curious if there's some more, I don't know if sinister is the word, but more other industry, like whether it's commercial spaces or casinos or places that they want to evoke some type of emotion from the people that come into these spaces, and they can just manipulate the smell a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, people are already doing that with kind of baked bread smells,
yes,
and yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of research going on behind closed doors as well, which I'd love to know about. But yeah, we're probably just being kind of manipulated, So yeah, watch out what you're kind of smelling. It's like, what is this? What is this doing to me?
Well, cool. We'll leave it there. Anything else you want to say, or are you good?
I'm good. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for coming to see me and checking out the exhibition.
I'll be following along. I want to know more. I want to know how to not lose my money at the casino. All right. Thanks, Jim. Yes, Joe, thank you. That was so cool talking to you. I think I could have gone on and on and on. And I hope we can talk again when your research is done, and maybe some of those secrets that we're worried about somebody stealing some of your ideas are published and everything is safe and sound, and we can go even deeper into it. I could talk about that kind of stuff all day. As she mentioned, Joe is at joeburzynska.com. That's JOBURZNSKA.com. That'll be in the show notes for this as well on iTunes and everywhere else you guys are listening. She's on Twitter. Drop her a line at InVinoPipias. So InVinoPipias on Twitter. I'm, of course, at Decibel Dan on most things like Twitter, Instagram, and WeChat as well now. Decibel Wine's up on Facebook. Visit decibelwines.com. Use the promo code DBPodcast to receive 10% off your first order. And thanks again to Kari Wine with all their good stuff. Please visit them. Next week, we've got a great conversation with my new buddies, Rebecca and Hamish, who own the hippest vermouth bar and absurdly awesome restaurant Banksy on the waterfront in Sydney. We'll chat then. Drop me a line in the meantime. Cheers.